All right, so like I mentioned, we're really going to focus on the process of our evaluation and then identify some of those hot spots and common issues. So it's, as you know, every district has their own way of doing things. And Parkway is really, really good at finding our own way of doing things. So there's definitely the wrong way, the right way, and then the Parkway. And that holds extremely true for our evaluation. We are one of 3/10 of districts in the state. So 99.7% of districts in the state are doing something different than we're doing with evaluation. And that's, we created our own. So we're not using me, we're not using the state model. We spent about 8 or 9 years ago, a long time with the then coordinator of assessment, Kevin Beckner, who's now our assistant superintendent, and the coordinator of professional development, Liz Morrison, and really looked at how does evaluation and professional learning work together. And so what we have now is a process that makes a lot of sense to us that have been here for a long time, but can feel very overwhelming when you're first starting. So if it feels like this is just too much, don't worry. Everyone feels like that when they first see it. And then you'll have this recording, which no one's ever had before, to come back to. So you can remind yourself just how you felt then, look at your face, and then think, look at how much better I'm doing now. So if you are interested in accessing the process in a digital way, you can always go to the talent development website, which is that up here, that tinyurl.com/ParkwayPD. Most of the resources that you're going to need out of my office, you're going to be able to find on that website. I try and link everything that you need so that principals have a one-stop shop that they can go to and, you know, get stuff without having to send emails and go hunting a lot. So that's a great place to start. If you click on the evaluation menu at the top, this screen is going to come up, and you'll see in red, there's the handbook that has all of the descriptions of how the process works. Many principals, I will let you know, print that out and keep it with all of their notes and everything on there so that when they do things that they only maybe do once a year, they can come back to it and remember, oh, I did this last year, I don't want to do this again, or I want to repeat the way I did that. And then underneath, you'll see all in blue is all of our multiple different rubrics that we have for our different job classes. This is really just for you to be able to look at when you're actually doing evaluations in our program. That is a homegrown program that's called Peers, which is not to be confused with the retirement for educators. That's also called Peers. But Peers was written in Cold Fusion about 15 years ago. Cold Fusion's an older code, and it was really, really fancy at the time. It's now really, really old and static.
And I would add, I think you touched on it pretty well, Amy, but Peers can occasionally make you feel like you're losing your mind. You will hit send on an evaluation and it just disappears. Or the teacher will sign off on it, you will sign off on it. It's saying the teacher hasn't signed off on it. You tell them to do it again, you do it again. Just embrace it. It's the way it goes. It's not you going crazy, it's truly the system.
Okay, if you don't have this printed out, I do encourage you to, it's in the email, I do encourage you to open it up. Basically, the rest of the time, we're just going to be going through this. And so if you want to type in or make any notes, you're more than welcome to do that. But this has kind of evolved. Pat and I have created this over the years of sort of the places that seem to get the most confusing. And so that's just a really good resource for you to have access to. So we're going to jump right in. If you have it out or open, if you want to turn to page 4, and we'll just kind of jump in. As I mentioned earlier, if you have any questions, please just type them in the chat, and then Kim or Pat, if you'll make me stop talking, or Bogus, and we'll make sure that we get those answered, or for sure we'll add them to the FAQ page. So 6 parts to our valuation process. These should sound fairly familiar, except maybe for the eFolio. So every teacher does an annual PLP. Some districts call them a PGP, but it's really that learning plan. What is it that you are going to focus on developing yourself throughout the year? We do have extended observations. If you've been used to the knee or the state model, those kind of went away, but we still do mini observations, which are short, 5 to 15 minutes, and extended observations, which are a minimum of 30 minutes. We also have an eFolio, which is really just a digital Dropbox. It's a place for all of your evaluation resources and evidence and artifacts to be kept in one place. The 5th thing is a summative conference at the end of the year and the end of year meeting, often held together at the same time. And then in years 3, 5, and every 3 years after that, our educators complete a client survey. So we're going to kind of spend some time going through each of those 6 sections. And like I said, just stop me with questions, or especially our experienced administrators, jump in with things that you know or wish you would have known when you started this. We are organized by the Danielson's domains. So at least in that sense, you will recognize that from the state model, and from the knee, it's the same organizational structure. We just wrote our own descriptors. It is a performance evaluation, which means we are evaluating how teachers are performing at that moment in time. So sometimes when you look at the language and you're trying to think about growth, or you're trying to think about the summative, because it is a performance evaluation, the language or the verbiage might sound a little strange, but when you look at it through that lens, it's a little bit easier. So the first domain is planning and preparation. This is definitely easiest to see when you're having a pre-observation conversation before you're doing one of the extended evaluations. Because the minis are just 5 to 15 minutes long, it can sometimes be challenging to identify the planning and preparation that goes into a lesson. If you can do it, that's great. If not, that's some of the challenges. So the domains 2 and 3 are the learning environment and the instructional practices. These are the ones you'll most often be looking at when you're in the classrooms. This is, what is the teacher doing or the educator doing to instruct and set up their community. The 4th domain is monitoring, assessment, and feedback. And this is really one of those that you may want to use the eFolio, have educators submit some examples to you, or you have that discussion during the extended pre-conference or post-conference. And then finally, the 5th one is our professional responsibility. And these are often things that you'll be able to use during faculty meetings, during CLT, PLC time, and open house, that kind of stuff. We'll talk a little bit more about eFolios and how that works, but just know that there is a caveat for teachers that were hired before 2009, that they do not, should they not choose to use the eFolio, they can just email it to you. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that when we get there. We do use a 4-point rating scale. So we have exemplary, effective, development, and ineffective. Our expectation is that educators are in the effective or development area. We do not expect to see teachers 100% in the exemplary area, because we know that everyone has an area that they can and should be growing. We've tried really hard to communicate that having in a development area is not a bad thing, but educators are perfectionists and sometimes it goes south. That doesn't mean we want you to stay away from development area. In fact, we've had the conversation that picking something that's a high leverage area, making it development area, that's your best coaching opportunity. Trying to say, oh my gosh, this teacher is a hot mess, and not marking 15 areas, development areas, probably isn't going to be as effective.
I was just going to say, Amy, when I look at exemplary and development together, I look, if I'm going to mark a teacher exemplary, then they're going to have a great in practice something that I could steal to show to somebody in the development area. So that's how I look at that. Effective is, that's what we expect, but exemplary would be like, oh, wow, this is an anchor lesson or an anchor practice when it comes to parent communication, that I could then say in the development area, hey, have you thought about doing something like this? So that's how I kind of like piggyback those two against each other.
I love that idea. So look, moving on to page 5, you'll see in the handbook that I've kind of, with Pat, added some helpful hints, things that tend to bog people down or get people caught up. And so just the August, September helpful hints, the biggest one is we do not do any evaluations for the first 10 days. Typically, we tell people that this is a great time for you to go walk the halls, stop in, leave little Post-it notes, do all of those little community building things. In a virtual hybrid environment, we'll have to see what virtual notes and virtual pop-ins look like and develop like. But really, this is not that you're not expected to be in classrooms those first 10 days. This is we're not evaluating teachers in those first 10 days. As Kathy mentioned, the effective is the expected. If there's anything that is identified in the exemplary column or the ineffective column, it needs to have supporting documentation, which really is usually a description of what you've seen, perhaps a picture, perhaps something else. But really what you need to know is that that left column and that right column, if there's anything in there, it needs to have documentation. Human resources will expect to see that. If you decide a teacher needs the support on a PIP or a practice improvement practice, that they'll want to see what is the documentation.
Can I add?
Yes.
Sorry. Yeah, and I think sometimes it's hard to mark somebody developing early on because, oh, maybe I caught them on an off time, maybe this, maybe that. I would strongly recommend that you do. And again, it's in the verbiage that you're putting down, but if you mark them developing, I'm hoping to see A, B, and C, and then you have a path and a clear pipeline of the fact that you've documented from very early in the year that this is a concern, because I think she's probably going to get to a point of at what point you want to really start thinking about whether or not somebody should be returning the following year. And you never want to cold cock somebody with surprising news that they're not performing well. And oftentimes you can say it and it doesn't really make sense until they see it in writing. And at the very least, if you're teetering on the line and you're like, gosh, I'm really not sure if this is developing or if this is okay because they're a new teacher, then if nothing else, mark them as effective, but make sure that in your comments, it very, very clearly states that, you know, and I'm sorry, I'm at a lack of verbiage right now, but the specific concern and the specific area of growth, what you want to see them changing and tweaking by the time you're in the room next. And then by golly, get that on your calendar because as you know, you're all coming from buildings of some sort, be it as a teacher or a principal, time will get away from you fast. And you want to make sure that you're giving people every opportunity to turn it around and to do right by kids and to do right. You want to do right by them. And in being honest and in being timely, that's the best way to do right by them, I think. Mike, Pat.
Absolutely. So one quote that you'll hear out of PNEA and from HR is that if it isn't written, it doesn't exist. So if we're having a concern, if there's an educator that needs some extra support, document, document, document. It needs to be written down in the evaluation. It needs to be emailed and sent to the teacher. It needs to be written down. If it isn't written, it doesn't exist. I'm sure every single one of the administrators in here can tell you a frustrating story about they thought they were on the right path and then a situation occurred and they didn't have it written down and it wasn't the outcome that they were intending. The best sentence, if you remember one thing from all of this development, is if it isn't written down, it doesn't exist.
And I'll add a quick piece, to that. And it's tied to what Kim said. You want teachers to know what the concerns are a hard conversation, if it comes to my role, is when, to Kim's point, that people feel sandbagged and it was not written down. Well, we talked about it. We talked about it. Again, as hard as it is, the same way we do with students, here's my concern. Have that there, because as hard as those conversations will be in January or February or whenever they might be, having it there, it also is important for me to support the process, because I know here's all the things that the teacher was told. And in writing, this is what's been documented. Here are the step pieces. So I totally echo that idea. Get it in, put it in writing, make sure that it's been seen and been talked about, because that, again, it's that piece where if things do get more complicated, that base has been covered, and no one should be surprised. I'll say it that way.
Will just ask a great question. Does it need to be documented in peers, or can it be documented via email? I think that depends. So if there's something that if I have a passing conversation with someone because of something that I happen to hear, I generally will follow that with an email. Thanks so much for taking the time to talk with me today. Just to reiterate, please remember a softer tone when dealing with so-and-so, whatever, littler things like that. But if it is something that you see during an evaluation, or it's evaluative in your mind, then you do need to document it in peers. Like I said, I think for some reason teachers will occasionally they'll hear something in passing, and that's easy to be like, well, I don't even remember that. They might read an email and be like, but when they see it in an evaluation, oh, we're not messing around with this. And the other thing that I would, and I'm sorry, Pat, because I know you're looking for more work right now, like a hole in the head. But Pat is great to reach out to, just to bounce ideas off of. Like, okay, I have this teacher, they're struggling in this particular area. I have done A, B, and C. What other ideas do you recommend for me? Because he has a much more global lens than we have as a one building leader. We kind of know the tools are at hand, whereas Pat can say, oh my gosh, I was just in this building and I know this was going on, reach out to them. And while I'm on that is another piece that we need to make sure that we remember in the forefront. It is our job to support these people in their growth. So it's not just, hey, go do that or fix this. It's, I'm really worried about what I'm seeing here, or, talk to me a little bit about this. I hear what you're saying, but I think I'd like to provide you with a little support. Would you like to start with observing one of your peers? Would you like to start by observing in another building? Would you, I would like to put a coach in your room so they can model for you. Just kind of get in your head. What are your tools at hand? What are your tools in your building? Who are the peers you can reach out to easily say, like, hey, I've got a teacher that's struggling in this area. Do you have anybody that's nailing it, that's perhaps a new teacher, so that they can see the attainability of it? You also don't want to put somebody in a classroom that's like way so far out of their reach. Like attainable goals, small attainable goals. This is how we're going to get there. So
and I can be a support in that way too. If you are looking, particularly if you have a teacher that just needs to step it up a little bit, bump it up a little bit, and it would be uncomfortable for you to send them into a teammate or another teacher in your buildings, I lots of times will find a job alike at a different building and set up that process either with a coach or with myself to do that visit. And that's been a really successful way to not make it feel as public, but to still get them that model. And what we've really moved away from is we're not taking those teachers to our super rock stars. We're taking them to our strong teachers, our solid teachers, because like Kim said, if it's so far above, they say, that's not me, I can't do that. And don't change anything. If they can see something that is slightly better or a solid step better, we have seen more success with transferring.
Right. I take my good teachers to my great teachers because you want to push everybody forward. But somebody that's really struggling, like here's your next step. The other thing I will say is if you PIP anyone, please let Mike and myself know, as well as Pat. Make sure that he's pulled into the process.
You're stealing my thunder. It's an upcoming slide.
Sorry, I'm done. So sorry.
Cartelia Lucas, who many of you know, I remember when she first became head principal, she said, what's the best advice you've seen that good principals do? And the first thing I said was, get to know Pat. Because Pat cares about good instruction. He wants us to have solid teachers, but he also needs to make sure that everyone gets a fair shake. So the more you can wrap Pat in, I email him a lot. He and I talk through ideas a lot. Just to have that conversation going from the start makes everything, when you're working with a challenging teacher that gets emotional, easier. So this is the scariest slide, I think, in the whole presentation, because the reality is October is halfway through the year for evaluation for our non-tenured teachers, because evaluations are due in March. So October becomes halfway through the year. Making a calendar and sticking to it is huge, because there's a lot to evaluate. You'll work with your principal or your assistant principals and decide how do you want to organize it. Some principals like to do one, especially when they're new, like to do one mini on every one of their staff members. Some principals and assistant principals split it by department, by grade level. Some split it by years of experience. Some assistant principals will take the first 3 years and the second will take the next ones if you're at the high school level. So really just work with your leadership staff. There's benefits and drawbacks to everyone. Don't try and do everything all in the first year. It will absolutely kill you, because we know it's just like conferring with kids. When things get stressful, the first thing that bumps off your calendar is going in to see those observations. And then all of a sudden you get backed up and it's February or it's March and you're in panic mode and feeling like all you're gonna do for the next weeks is evaluate. We have, as I mentioned, we have 2 different kinds of evaluations. We have mini, those are 5 to 15 minutes long, and we have extended. Both types of evaluations or observations require that you have in-person, face-to-face, or this year virtual, live conversation and written feedback. Now for the minis, a lot of times that might look like you're walking past, hey, just making sure you've got the peers, the mini evaluation, everything looked good, or hey, I asked you about this, did you have a chance to think about that? If you don't have concerns, this is usually a pretty quick check-in, but it is an expectation that you do that check-in. I'm going to ask Kim and Mike what you think that will look like this year. Does it still need to be a face-to-face in a Zoom? And Pat, you may want to weigh in too. Or is an email check-in going to suffice for the in-person within 2 days for the minis?
So I'll answer first because I was able to click off mute faster. My quick response would be, if it needs to be, I would say it needs to be a phone call or a Zoom or a Google Meet or whatever. The same way that hallway conversation works. I think, again, the language of the agreement says to have that part. And here's the other thing I would say in that. It might be a really quick piece, but let's say that you've seen a thing that you're concerned about. I'm not marking you developing in this area, but here's a question I have from the mini for you to be able to say, look, Jesse, here's what I saw. I have a question about this. It gives them that ability to respond and answer a thing that you couldn't see because you'd not been there at the beginning of the lesson. If it's just an email, I think we've all lived in this, email does not have very good nuance. So that would be my really strong push. Do it. I know it's a drag for all of us in a truly virtual way, but and if it's a phone call, then you document, phone call to Jesse Burkett, and the same way we do with parent contact. But I would super strongly push for that response.
I'll add, I agree with Pat. I'll add that the meeting that we'll have, the HR Hot Topics and Student Service 101 meeting next Thursday, we're going to be talking to all administrators just what the evaluation tool will look like as we have this coming school year, with the different aspects of it, with virtual learning, in-person blended, never knowing where we'll go from the in-person blended one way or another in that on that line of continuum. So we'll talk more about it, but I would say that I agree with Pat that a conversation, not an email, will be best served, and I would say almost to my lens, to use the word carefully, expected, because that's what we would want as if it were me on the other side. So I've lived my life as an administrator for a long time, just realizing if it was me on the other side, what would I want? And that's been my baseline to make decisions when it comes to a lot of these things. But I do think it's in our best interest to have conversations, to build relationships with our employees, especially being new. They thrive on your conversations, what you share with them. They really want that in Parkway. And so long answer to a very simple question. I agree with Pat.
I will ask a specific question that I'll be honest, I don't know the answer to. Is who's evaluating the virtual teachers? Is it their?
We'll talk about that next Thursday. It's going to be back on the individual buildings, but once we have an idea of that, Kevin's already kind of made that decision that it'll be back on us, but we'll have to figure out a way to navigate that as administrators. So yeah, it's a great question, Kim. But I think it'll be easier once we get into it next week.
Perfect. All right, moving on to the next part. The professional learning plan. Every educator, no matter where they are in their cycle, makes a PLP every single year. There is, again, this was created and then changes happened. And so it doesn't exactly match with in peers, and we'll go in peers in a little while, but in peers, in order for teachers to type in their PLP, they have to first complete a self-assessment. So they need to go through the entire rubric and click a self-assessment about where they would score themselves. At the end of that, they can select to share that information with their evaluator or keep it private. It's about 50-50. It's really not a big deal one way or the other, but we just do that so that we feel like it's an honest self-assessment. But when they get the PLP, and particularly your new teachers, you'll hear a panicked, I can't write my PLP, I can't get it. And the first question you need to ask is, did you finish your self-assessment? Because it won't ungray until that happens. So after the PLP, the educator writes a PLP, we often encourage them not to hit submit until they have this initial conversation with you. And that's because lots of times in conversation, you might encourage them to narrow the focus or broaden the focus, or you may have met with another educator who has a similar focus and they may want to work together. We do have to go through Rodney, and it's a multi-day delay if a teacher submits it and then we want to unlock it. Once it's submitted, they can't make any changes to it. So what we've really just started doing is encouraging people, bring your PLP to your initial conversation or on your Zoom with your principal or your evaluator before you hit submit so that those changes can happen together. Typically, the PLPs are due September 15th. We are moving it back at least to October 1st because we're starting school 2 weeks later. We may, depending on what in the world school looks like, and if it's just not feasible that you've met individually with each teacher by October 1st, we'll bump that back. But it does come fast. So making a schedule, this is an awesome time as a new person to have those conversations. If you are a new lead principal, it may be worth your time to talk to your assistant and find out how it was done there in the past. Doesn't mean you have to do it that way. It's just great to have that knowledge. And then some of our experienced administrators, do you meet with all of your teachers around a PLP or certain cohorts of teachers, or do you only do the PLP initial conversations with those that you are in charge of evaluating?
Those in charge of evaluating is what we've done.
Kira, how do you guys do it?
We've always divided our entire staff into groups, and then we serve as the go-to person for specific staff members. So,
Perfect.
but then try to make sure that we are doing mini observations with all, so that they're familiar with both evaluators.
And like I said, that's just really up to you about what process makes the most sense for you.
Which could change in these days. So.
Yeah. Okay, so after the teachers have completed their self-assessments, they've written their PLP, they have that handy guide that shows them, here's the kinds of things here's some examples, here's some stuff. They've had an initial conversation with you. The first 10 days of school has started. It's time that you can do your first minis. Minis, as I mentioned a couple times, last 5 to 15 minutes. They're typically just unscheduled pop-ins. We talked about that verbal and written feedback. And one thing that we do recommend is, particularly as you're getting started, the teachers have the opportunity to view their scores before you have that quick conversation, especially if it's something that you are marking an experienced teacher in a developing area that they maybe haven't experienced before. We really ask that teachers have every bit the chance to have that emotional reaction and then have a conversation, calm down, and hope that you and that person can partner together. We don't want to use the evaluation process as a gotcha or as a time to scare teachers. It's really about growth and support. And Parkway is incredibly lucky in the number of supports we have available. Kim and Mike or Pat, anything from your lens to add to that? I know that's been a bit of a hot spot in the past. Hi, Tracy, do you have a question?
I have a question. So a question for that, so because that was a hot spot at Northeast last year. So does that mean that we finalize the mini, send it to the teacher, and then have the conversation, and if we want to change it, then we call someone to change it? Or does that mean, like, I think we've done it a number of ways. I mean, like, I agree. I want people to be able to process their emotions around something so that when they come into a meeting, they can bring the support that they want, that's going to make them feel comfortable, and also be able to, like, more, less emotionally respond to something, and we can have a really good conversation. But I guess, how are you suggesting we send that information to the teachers? Is that clear?
Yeah, I'm going to defer to HR and PNEA on that one.
So my preference, if I think about being a teacher, my preference would be send me the rubric marked, because you can have marked it up before it's that final submission, so that, I think you said it beautifully, Tracy, so I can see it. I've seen your comments, what you've highlighted. So when we have that conversation, I can have the support I need, but also if I have questions about your rating, what is it that you saw? Or if I have the ability to say, here's what I did beforehand, or you didn't notice, but we just finished dealing with this student's emotional meltdown, and that's why the transition was so rough. Because then it gives you the ability to have the dialogue, go, okay, got it. And to I think to Kim's earlier point, that's okay, I understand that. You may not change that rating or may be okay with the rating, but you might say, I'd love to come back and see you in 4 days. Tell me when you're going to be restarting something like this. So I think that's the cleanest piece, because that way everyone, back to Amy's other point, it's written, I know what it is, they can respond. And I think the other part, they can respond with having done a little bit of processing. It's that part where I come in and now suddenly for the first time I see my document while I'm having this conversation. So do I respond, appropriately to your really good concern, or do I get all defensive and then what you wanted, this great dialogue to help support me as a teacher, and I walk away going, that Namundsen, she's horrible and hates teachers, and which is what we don't want.
Yeah, I will say from just a management standpoint, and everybody, you've got to find your own way through it. It's an overwhelming amount of minis and observations and have I done, have I whatnot, which I have a document I'd be happy to share if anybody wants it, that I just use to track. But so my MO was that I would hit send before I left the room. Because otherwise I would find that I would leave the room and somebody would go into crisis, and then somebody else would ask me a question, and 20 things later I'm like, how did that play out, or exactly what was said? So it just helped me feel as though I had really done my due diligence of getting it recorded, giving it to them timely. Also, there are some teachers that are just kind of a little bit of a nervous Nelly, and they don't like wondering what you thought. So generally, I mean, unless the walkie went off and I had to leave in the middle, or if it would be something that I'd have a question with a, like I would want to ask my coach, can you tease this out? How did you unpack this with them? What did this look like? I just felt like it sat a little funny. Then I wouldn't do it, but I would generally track, either my coach down or kind of go back to my office and look through their plans and see, okay, you know what, actually that teacher was out 3 days ago, and I can tell they're a day behind their peers. I also, in the elementary level, sorry to anybody that isn't, for multiple reasons, but I would sweep my team and try to do, I would try to do third grade at a time so that I could see that they were in line and in sync with everyone, which it made it easier for me to see if something stood out, even if I was able to hit one for the mini lesson and hit, the second one for the end of the mini, the third one for the independent time. That's when you utilize what's out there. I look at their anchor chart, look at, the notes that might be on the board, look at what kiddos are writing on, and you can see right away if people are on track with their peers. So, side note. Sorry.
I'll add, as somebody coming from the secondary level, most recently, we divided it by subject and content. So, for me, if I had 8th grade science, I would try to get through all 8th grade science in one day so I could see it. If possible, I was like Kim, I tried to send it before I left the room. But the other thing that I tried to do was, if I couldn't do that, I did it before I left for the day. I liked having some delay because of the fact that I would then put my questions in the document so that they knew where I was questioning, like, oh, where did you come from to get to this point? Where were you going next? To make people feel at ease. So when they came in to meet with me for mini conversations or extended conversations, they came ready to talk and share that piece, because for a mini, you're only in there. Like I did minis for 15 minutes. That was my goal. I didn't go less than that. I stayed for 15 minutes because I wanted to see it. But when you walk in at the beginning, you're walking out in the middle of a lesson. If you come at the end or you come in the middle, I mean, you're missing stuff. So I always like to let them have the ability to add in their comments. What didn't I see while I was there, to just be able to have that conversation as well. So yes, if you can do it before you leave a room, but I would say I agree with Kim. People are going to get itchy if you don't have something to them by the end of the day, because they'll wonder what you're writing. And so if that meant me just staying the night into the evening to just put it together, because there were some days I was blessed, and I look at Kathy Lorenz, who's at Central Middle now as principal, there were some days where we had nothing going on in the day, and I could get into like 6 classrooms in a day, and it was wonderful. But what that means is you have 6 write-ups to do. So, for every blessing, there's a curse. So, but yeah, you take advantage of the time when you have it, because there'll be times where we won't have it.
As you're thinking about mini observations, there's a chart, and it's also in Peers. It's really kind of a neat little page that Rodney's developed that's in Peers. But just so that you know, for years 1 and 2, there's 3 to 5. That first one has to be done by October 1st. And Mike, let me know if any of these dates are changing that you've already discussed. 3 to 7, at least the first one by winter break, and then career educators 1 each semester. So really, that's not set up to make your life a nightmare. It's actually set up to help you get so that you're not in a situation where now you're supposed to have 5 minis on a teacher or 3 minis on a teacher, and it's February and you haven't seen anything.
That's going to be the same timeline. Pat and I have not really talked about it, but for me, it's what does the teacher need? And the teacher needs to have at least 1 mini by October 1st. So we don't want to forget anybody. And so the timeline is really there to help you manage the caseload that you have.
Agreed. Absolutely.
Amy, can I answer some questions in the chat?
Yeah, please.
Sorry. If a team of teachers want to have a singular PLP focus, can they co-write it? Can they meet with an admin group? With an admin in a group, sorry.
Yes, we have several, a lot of CLTs will co-write their PLP. I think that's great because there's a higher probability that they will focus on that work. In fact, one of the options for career teachers is to have it be a collaborative goal. We do ask that, you know, they don't just copy and paste what their teammates do. It might be 95% copy and paste, but at least, you know, my additional sentence is X.
Will ask, is submitting in peers system the same as sending it to the talent development office, or would that be a separate action?
It's the same.
Sorry. With virtual learning, could there be the possibility of allowing teachers to record their virtual lessons for us to review for evaluation as opposed to being visible on Zoom and Google Meets?
I think that's an awesome question. We'll write down and find out what the answer is. I think there's probably upsides and downsides to that, right?
Yeah. I will document the question.
Thank you, Kim.
Yes, ma'am. There are a couple folks just wanting different evaluation tracking devices, so I'll write down those names. Mike, I assume you have one as well, so I'll get yours as well as maybe one from a high school if you want me to.
And if, you know, Kathy, Kiera, who else is in there? Tracy, any of you that are willing to send me what you've used, I can compile those and just share them out with everyone, because I know finding that system, it's like conferring notes. Every year I thought I had my notebook down, this is going to be it, it's amazing, it's the best system in the world, and half the time by October I was throwing it out and trying a new way. So sometimes just seeing lots of examples can help you set up. The one thing about Brandon, that you mentioned about the privacy issues, because Zoom has passwords now, and because Google is behind our login, we should be okay with privacy videos, as long as it's kept in district, that you're not sharing it with people outside of our district. So just to kind of finish up the mini observation piece, when you're in there, and different administrators do it differently, you are marking areas that you observe while you're in the classroom or in the setting. You're marking, it's a performance-based evaluation. So what do you see? They're also formative. Just because an educator is marked developing on the first observation does not mean that they won't make it to effective towards the end of the year, and vice versa. They might have knocked it out at the park at the beginning, and for whatever reason, you're seeing that trail off. In peers, it will always record the most recent marking. So if you mark an effective, and then the next time you mark a development, the development is going to be the one that stays there. Different administrators have different philosophies. Some administrators say, okay, I'm going to do as many things as I can in domain 2 today. And they just open peers and scroll up and down domain 2 looking for everything that they can. Others will say, you know what, this is, what does the lesson present to me? What makes the most sense? And then they mark things, sometimes not even in peers, and then go back and mark it, or flip between domains. So it is a very large, there's 36 descriptors. It is a very large evaluation. As you get started, I encourage you to figure out a system and figure it out in a way that makes sense for you to learn what those descriptors are. Because after you've done it several times, you start to know, okay, classroom environment, I can, views, values, cultures of others, integrating technology. You start to know some of those, but when you're in the classroom for 5 to 15 minutes or on a Zoom for 5 to 15 minutes, and you're trying to read and understand what those descriptors mean, as well as mark multiple ones. Without a plan, it's gonna feel really overwhelming. Any tips, our experienced administrators in that area?
I will say I generally would start, my first evaluation would generally focus on learning environment, because that's realistically what they have been working on for at least the first 10 days of school. So I think it's a fair starting point. And then there were oftentimes though that I would go in and just see like absolutely amazing instruction and see other great pieces that I would jump into, but it kind of helped me feel comfortable of, this is the domain I'm really relying on heavily today for that start, just because I feel like it's also giving them that fair crack at it.
And if I can add to that, I think the strategy I used, I would open up every domain before I went in, so that I never knew what evidence I would see that might cross the domains. And so I just focused on capturing whatever I could see that was actually observable and clicking, and I did not get concerned with if I only could click one criteria in learning environment, maybe one in instructional practice. So I just went in saying, what do I see evidence, observable evidence, and allowed myself the fluid nature between the domains, among the domains.
Sorry. Amy, does Peers run on iPad or Mac products?
It's a website, so yes, it will, but it's not going to have the dynamicness to kind of reformat itself. It'll look exactly like it looks on a Chromebook. So really, Chromebooks seem to work the best. All right, we talked about all of that. It's about growth, not gotcha. There's a link in here that you have to descriptive feedback stems. This is a document that was developed lots of years ago that was really coaching stems, but I think a lot of administrators have found them helpful when you're trying to figure out how to say something that you really just want to say, what in the heck was that? This is some language that can help you get started in a little bit more nuanced way that might have a conversation. I also think that in the moment when you're typing in Peers, and if you're trying to type something up and send it out, having some language so that you don't start those sentences exactly the same way every time. Extended observations. We talked about minis. Extended are really a holdover from a process that, for the most part, across the state of Missouri and across the country has gone to the wayside, but we still do it in Parkway, and it is a part of our culture. And so if you're coming, especially with experience from a different district, this may be a different practice than you're used to, but it is something that our teachers hold dear because they feel like they can show you a whole example of what they do across an entire lesson. So extendeds do last a minimum of 30 minutes. You have that same expectation of verbal and written, but you have 5 days. And the conversation, the verbal feedback really is more often a little bit more formal. It's scheduled, it's sit down, you have some conversations. This is a great time to have a pre-observation conference so that you can look at that planning and preparation piece, or ask the educator to, if you're not going to do a pre-conversation, ask them to bring their lesson plans or bring their evidence that they'd like to share with you to the post-conversation so that you can sit down and really look at particularly the domain 1 and domain 4 expectations, the domain 4 being the data comparisons or pieces. You'll see
one other.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, one other piece. Generally to the first extended conference that I have, I would have my teachers bring their conferring binders so that we could take the time to look at them closely, talk about the student data that was in them, but also it just was kind of my nice way of making sure that the binders were in place and that they were up to date. And it wasn't just like, oh, I filled in the initial reading level and we're done. That they're truly conferring with students. And it kind of helped me with accountability. And it was also something my teachers just knew to expect. So you couldn't put off getting it started, kind of.
Great suggestion. Extended evaluations, they're typically one scheduled, one unscheduled. Lots of times with teacher permission, you can do them both unscheduled. Particularly some of our experienced teachers are like, look, I don't want to get the nervousness of trying to anticipate when you're going to come in. I do what I do, just come in when you can and see me in action. So did I cut out to you? You can still hear me? Yes, okay. The eFolio, this is one of those things that, again, is old and static, but kind of cool. So the eFolio is a place where you can collect all of the evidence, remembering that if there's ever a time that you're going to mark an educator exemplary, or you're going to mark an educator ineffective, there has to be some kind of documentation or artifact or written description to support that. In order to keep it all in one place, you can use the eFolio to drop them in or request that teachers send things and drop it into their eFolio. At the district level, there's 3 reasons that we use the eFolio. The first is if you need to gather evidence of something that you haven't been able to see. So if you are looking for parent communication and maybe ask them for their newsletter, or if you're doing a data analysis and asking them to share how they're using the information that they're gathering in order to differentiate instruction. So there's some of those descriptors that really lend themselves more to having them submit documentation or artifacts to the eFolio. If there isn't a time when an educator disagrees with a score that you've made, this is also the place that they can say, no, I really do that, and here's my evidence of that. Or you might not have realized it, but that's something that I do this way, and then here's my evidence of that. So teachers kind of know that this is where they put their artifacts and documentation if they're showing something that you maybe have a disagreement about as well. Anything to add, Parkway experienced administrators, to add to this? The eFolio seems to get more questions than just about anything, and it's really just a data drop box.
I think you covered it.
I think you hit it well. I think the thing, and this is past history, it serves the exact purpose that Amy described. There was a time where eFolio got bent out of shape. So this is what is here is what you want to use it for. I'll just say that.
Kathy, did you want to add something?
No, I was just agreeing, and I was just saying that sometimes it's a chance for the teachers to brag too and put things in here. And if they want to initiate, hey, can I add this in the eFolio? Sure. So it's not always
I'm so
glad
glad you
where
said
we're
that.
asking them, because they change evaluators. Some of them, in a length of 10 years, maybe they had 3 different evaluators. And looking at the roster of all new admin that we have here, that could happen. So I always say, throw it in there. Let somebody see it.
Kelly Morton used to say that. She used to say she thought like it was a collection of best practices that she wished she could almost do like a development session and just have people look at other people's eFolios for their exemplaries, that artifacts that had been dropped in there. Thank you so much for adding that. So as I mentioned, there's no district requirements for submitting artifacts. We do ask that not more than 8 of the descriptors that you are going to score are achieved by teachers submitting to eFolios. We did have a time when up to 80% of the descriptors might be by an administrator submitting and asking a teacher to submit things. We've really decided that that simply means the administrator is not seeing enough live in the classroom. There are some, we said, that naturally make more sense to use as artifacts, but the bulk of it should be, how are you seeing your teachers perform? Final note on the e-folios, if it comes to the end of the year, and this may be more of an issue this year because of our hybrid situation, and you get to a descriptor that you have not had the opportunity to score, and the e-folio, for whatever reason, it doesn't make sense to show them an artifact, or you have more than 8. The default is effective. A teacher cannot be marked needs improvement in an area that was not observed on a mini or extended. That seems kind of obvious, but once you start going through and you're like, oh, you know what, they don't or they didn't, it can get hairy fast. So make sure that if there's an area that isn't observed, you default to effective. Pat, checking your microphone. You good? Did I forget any part of that?
No, not at all. I think that's and that's true in the eFolio, and then true also in your summative pieces. Again, if it's unscored for good or for bad, it defaults to that effective. And part of that is I think it's the appropriate assumption. We assume our educators were effective. If they were not, then hopefully you would have seen that in the course of the year and provided support. And again, I think it's a nice element to have, and it's, I guess maybe the other piece, if I put myself in your shoes for a minute, I've tried, I've not been able to see this. Rather than killing myself and my teachers, I can say, okay, you've done so well on all these other pieces, I'm going to make this assumption you are effective. I'm not going to get there, so that you can move on.
As I mentioned, we do client surveys. So client surveys after year 3, the educators can create their own. I also have sample ones available, but they will send out a survey to all of their students and just ask, how am I doing kind of questions. What do you like? What would you like to see me improve or change? In year 5, it goes to parents. After that, the teachers can select if it's 2 students or 2 parents. A key note is that teachers do not have to share the summary of their data with you. They do not have to share the actual results of, I had 16 respondents scored this way. They share with you in a conversation, this is what I summarized. I'd like to tell you that overall, my parents think I'm doing a good job. They'd like to see some more. It is a delicate conversation here. We really, again, want to see this as growth, not gotcha. And for teachers to look and be able to hold the knowing that their evaluator won't necessarily see the scores, the raw scores, but your summary of them has been something that's been trust building. That being said, we have a ton of amazing educators, and lots of them will want to show you the data because it's great data. The kids love them, the parents love them, the parents are excited about all of the stuff that they do. So it's not wrong if they show it to you, it's just we can't ask them or force them to share.
Amy?
Yeah.
Another question. So as we observe, should we assume the teacher is effective and then look for evidence to support that or lean us in another direction towards developing our exemplary?
I say we hired effective teachers. So yeah, the default should be we're looking for effective teachers. When we have situations that they're not, we need to address that pretty clearly. But I would say it's that line between effective is always what we're expecting to see, because we expect to have effective teachers in our classroom. If they're going above and beyond that, highlight it. If they're not, we need to support them to make sure that they can. Kim, do you want to add?
Well, and I know when we were trained way back when on the tool, there was a lot of discussion around developing is not a bad thing. we're all developing in some way, shape, or form and growing. So I don't know if you want to speak on that from the district lens, Amy, but there were times, you touched on it earlier in the sense of it's a tool that evolves. So if you go in one time and you see something that frankly is a bit developing and it's lacking in the rest of what they're doing, you mark it developing, but then if you go in the next time and they've grown in that area, it is effective. So it's just, I think it's a hard for somebody to see a developing is a hard mindset. But when you explain to them like, well, we're all developing. Now you just have to be very honest in your language. Like there's developing, and then there's developing. You're getting ready to go down a notch. So just being really clear. And again, when in doubt, type it in. Type it in and talk it through.
Well, if I can jump in, I oftentimes, because I would do my own self-reflection, and I'm hard on myself, but I also know what areas I need to work on, and gave myself some developings. And with my the people I was supervising, I'd be really clear on that as a group before, I gave myself, these are my 2 areas I'm really working on. These are my areas of emphasis. At the beginning of the year, I gave myself a developing, just because that's the mindset, that growth mindset is what we want with kids. But it is true. If I would have gotten an A- in high school, I would have been crying at the teacher. So I get that we're working with a bunch of perfectionists who want exemplaries. But I think oftentimes when we model that, we are not looking for perfection, we're looking for growth and self-reflection instead. That can be really positive, just to be vulnerable with staff.
Yeah, I think that's powerful, and I appreciated Kim's comment, because I think when we switch to this model, candidly, the other model, pretty much everyone started exemplary, and you had to be found to not be. So that was a problem. So for a lot of experienced educators, that developing was a real kick in the gut. And I think for some people, and I think Tracy, you said it really well. The idea is you look at developing as there's a place to grow. So if you have a younger staff, many of them will have a little bit different view of developing than if you've got some veteran staff members who will look at that, more in askance. And I think Kim really nailed it. The most significant part is I'm seeing you developing at this time in this mini observation. Let's talk about how you can grow and develop. What are things that we can do? And again, I always come back to how would you do it with your 8th grade ELA student who really punted on this writing prompt? You're going to say, look, this is a developing prompt. Here are things you can do to improve it. And I think that's an element that's super important. And Kim said it beautifully. You need to do these things to improve it. And if it's dire enough, you may need to say, you need to do these things to improve it, because if it doesn't move in that direction, then, and we're going to be getting to this, then there are some other actions that we may need to take. And is that honesty part.
Pat, that was a beautiful way of saying it. Because it's hard when you're having those conversations. This is someone's career, it's their livelihood. And I don't think that teachers often understand the pressure that falls on you when you're having those conversations. Or maybe it's just me, but I always try to go in and be very prepared and make sure I have what are my 3 main points that I want to make sure that they walk away with very clearly. You never want to say, do I need to worry about my job? That will be thrown at you. Well, realistically, our goal is to support you and get you growing. Yes, that is always an option. So never say, no. Gosh, that's never it. Because then they can say, well, he told me that I don't have to worry about my job. That's not a problem. So I always, Bogus always says, take a drink to pause and think before answering a question. In those conversations, I take a drink, don't take a drink, but don't feel bad about pausing and saying, well, right, let's focus on the here and now. Right now, this is what we know we need to do. And what I can tell you today is that my job is to support you and help you get where you need to go. Now, your job is to take the support and run with it, and to maximize all of the learning opportunities that we're going to provide you with. And I think that's not saying like, no, your job is not on the line. It's also, it's finding that nice way to say something honestly. And then I think another point I want to make, because I'm going to kind of phase in and out here a little smidge bit, just to be very honest about it. Amy is leaving you with document, which is so true. The other thing that I will say, and having done this a long time, and I know Mike's philosophy is very similar to mine, at the end of the day, make sure that you can say you treated your people as you would want to be treated. Do not mess with them. Do not take them for granted. They're your people. Like, I will tell you, I don't think there's a teacher in my former building, not my building, to get that, Mike, that would say that I didn't fight for them on their behalf. And you can't, I mean, I'll be honest, you can't save them all. There are some folks that, no matter the coaching we went through, and Pat worked very closely with me on a couple, it perhaps turns out that it's not the right career for them, but you really need to know that you've done everything to do right by your kids and right by your people. So that would be my other takeaway.
Amy, can I just jump in for a second? Feedback. Kim said everybody take a drink. I need to clarify that. My mother was an administrator in Rockwood for a long time, and so her advice to me 19 years ago when I got into administration, she said, when you're in a meeting or with somebody, you always have a cup of coffee or a donut or a bagel, and the moment you want to speak, you take a sip of your coffee, you take a bite of that bagel, because that gives you 10 seconds to think through. Do you really want to say what you want to say? And so I credit that to my mother, who's a retired administrator, and it has saved me over the years of my initial thoughts to take a sip of coffee or a soda or take a bite of a bagel, to think through that 10 seconds of how do I really want this to sound. So that's what Kim was referring to when I said take a drink. After 5:30 on a given afternoon, that's a different drink, but that's what
I suppose I should have clarified.
Yeah, I wanted to clarify it. So
drink we're consuming, my fault.
So I'm just looking up can you clarify whether peers indicates if available, if we need to ask this of teachers? eFolio you'll usually say, do you think you could share that with me? Would you pop it in the eFolio or drop it in the eFolio? It's not as sophisticated as it like identifies and sends out what you need. But pictures are definitely becoming something that's very popular to drop in eFolio. It really helps, especially if a teacher's away for a couple of days and then comes back, to see that moment in the classroom that you're referencing can be a great trigger to help identify that conversation. So pictures are a great way to do that. All right, we're getting towards the end here of the process. So as I mentioned at the very beginning, March 1st is the end of the year for our non-tenured teachers. And that's so that we can issue contracts and find out how many people are leaving and how many people we're not inviting back and all that good stuff. A summative evaluation is not an actual observation in and of itself. It's really just a conference. It's where you have and go over all of the evaluations for the year. Those of you that are experienced in other districts that use the NE or that use the state model and you're used to only having a very short summative, we expect that all 36 areas are scored across the year. So that can get really overwhelming. You do have to find a way for the people that you're evaluating to find evidence observed or submitted for all 36, 37 of our descriptors. I see everybody writing down. And then finally, that growth measure, this is typically a secondary thing because it's pretty universal at the elementary level, but if you're in a situation where a growth measure concern comes up, it is important that you loop in Carter Snow, who is our assessment coordinator, your evaluator, and Pat and HR, because we have some just hiccups that have happened in the past around the growth measures. And it's better if you're having a hiccup to get as many people that can support you and the teacher involved, because it very well may be a data technology issue. The teacher might have submitted it and put it in the wrong place or something. So before you mark anything as developing or ineffective in the growth measure, give yourself a little bit of an opportunity to do some digging. Anyone want to add anything else about the summative? Okay, it's typically at the same time that you do the summative, we have the end of the year conversation, and that is really the opportunity to go back to that PLP from the beginning of the year, talk about progress, talk about, what did you end up doing, or, oh my gosh, I totally forgot I said I was going to do that, which honestly might be something that we need to think about this year. So what are the PLPs that aren't going to fall off the plate, that are going to make sense this year, so that when we get to the end of the year conversation, it is something that has stayed and been meaningful throughout the year. There really is not that much more to it. Some principals do, or evaluators do, like to set up next year's PLP at the end of the year conversation. So I know this year you focused on X. It seems like you might want a new goal, or it seems like this might be something that you want to learn more about, but kind of anticipating and thinking about where are they going to go the next year. And that's so that if they want to do any learning over the summer, they have that opportunity. Is it okay with you guys if I blow through the break? All right. So that in a nutshell is kind of the process of the evaluation. Everything I've described is in excruciating detail on the website. You have these slides, and you also have the handbook. So all of the timelines, all of the expectations, all of the numbers, all of that is available to you. When we get into situations, and this is where I might ask Kim and Mike and Pat to really give a little bit more. When we get into situations where an incident happens, we do have a very specific way of documenting so that everyone is protected. Most importantly, our kids being protected. So this will not be the only time that you hear this. We dedicate in the past, we've dedicated a whole day to the areas of concern in new admin induction in the meetings that we have throughout the year. And so if you have any questions about this, know that there will be some more development. At least in the past, we've had more development coming around this. And if not, make sure you reach out to Amy and Mike. This is also something I think when I first started seeing this, I thought these were all official things, like, okay, well, where do I go find the memo of understanding? Or where do I go find the job target? Some of them live in peers and have an official document. Most of them are just what we're calling the documentation of that event. So a memo of understanding is literally an email that you sent clarifying, this is what I understand, this is what you understand, agree, and then they send back, yes, I got it. So as we're kind of working through these, know that it's not, there's not a form that you're going to go find online that has this exact thing, which I think can be a little bit confusing. Mm-hmm. So memo of understanding. Amy Joyce used to always say that these are kind of in an order of escalating, but not necessarily only in an order of escalating. If there's a situation where a student is in danger because of the action of a teacher, you might go straight to a letter of reprimand. You might skip over some of those things. But in general, you'll see these kind of are in an order of escalation. So the first one is a memo of understanding. So example of that might be, this educator isn't attending the faculty meetings or is showing up late. And you might say, I'm just trying to understand, why are you late? And they tell you, and you say, okay, well, do you understand that you're expected to be here on time? Yes. Send an email. They say, yes, I understand. done. It's really kind of just that first, hey, you've done this enough times that it's something I want to have a conversation about. The next one is the memo of expectation. And that's after you've had that conversation, that memo of understanding, and the same thing is still happening. You know, there's an expectation that you have lesson plans every day. Like, we don't wing lessons twice a week. And we shared that memo of understanding, but in a memo of expectation, you're still not doing that. And so here's the descriptor that falls under. Under domain 2, it's an expectation that teachers do, and then you plug in the expectation of that. And that's documenting so that they are very clear, this is what is expected of you. And as your evaluator, I'm not seeing that expectation. That could also be something like parent incidents. So you have parents who are contacting teachers and they're not responding to their emails. You know, it's been 3 weeks now. You as the evaluator are getting piled up or backed up with parents that are not getting responded. Memo of expectation of the expectation is that you get back to parents, you know, within however many days your building has set up. So that just becomes a little bit more formal. The PIP, and again, this will be a future development day, a professional improvement plan is not a way to try to get a teacher out of their job. It is a way to set in a formal coaching support so that they can improve practice to the benefit of their instruction or their whatever it is. So it is, PIPs are not meant to get people fired or release people. They are meant to put in a formalized way to support an educator in an area of growth. A letter of reprimand is just that. You did something, it was wrong. I hope it was one thing, but it's a big enough deal that I got to document. Example is a teacher had twins in her class. One twin did really well on a test. The other one did very poorly. And the teacher wrote, you know, bet your brother wouldn't like to see this. No, you can't do that. You can't do that. And so I don't necessarily need to PIP them because it was just a really bad choice. I don't really think I'm going to fire them out, but man, that was a pretty serious lapse of judgment. And that's, you know, like a letter in your file. That's documenting, like, you just can't do that. When you get to a job target, typically you've gone through the PIP process, which can be multiple weeks with multiple check-ins, and the goal of the PIP was not met. So a job target does become job dependent. It is if you don't meet this goal by this date, we're going to have conversations about your job. That if there's a place where a PIP, a letter of reprimand, or a job target, or any of the others are getting involved, Kim and Mike have to know right from the start. The best thing to do is share the draft of whatever you're making with them, ask for any clarifications, ask for any advice, and just make sure they're looped in. Pat, lots of times, can be a great resource for this too, particularly if it's a teacher that is maybe worked the system a little bit. That can be a really great way to, okay, we're going to work together and make sure that this is a growth plan that's going to support this teacher. But you never want to be in a situation where a job target or a PIP has come up and HR doesn't know it. Statement of charges is just that. You know, teacher had a bunch of kids over drinking at their house. Nope, got arrested, can't do that. And then final dismissal. And by that point, you know, Kim and Bogus are going to be very involved, and Pat as well. So kind of a high-level view of the steps of things, but documentation is the name of the game. And these are the levels of documentation that in actions that you need to take when situations that aren't great arise. Those of you with experience, anything you want to add?
So I think Amy does and this is a great slide that was added, Amy, what, like 2 or 3 years ago?
Yeah.
Because there's so much confusion about them. So, yeah, sadly, I have a lot of knowledge about all of these things now. So I'm going to separate them, like, from my perspective, into 2 chunks. If we're talking evaluation, that professional improvement plan, and we'll talk more about that, I think, as we go along, but that becomes the piece where you've done observations, we've gone from developing to improvement needed, and you've put some steps into place, and we're still not seeing improvement. And then you want to formally document in a professional improvement plan, here are the areas of concern, and here's the plan for helping you as a teacher address those things and get better. What is important, I think, to know for you as an administrator is, or for your head principal, whoever's doing it, is that you're a part of that plan, and it is, what things will you do to support the teacher? I will provide time for them to go to another building. I will here are times they will be with the instructional coach. So that tends to be, that improvement plan is very much part of that, of the process in evaluation. The memo of understanding, and I think Amy described it really well. You did a silly thing. I want you to know that you did a silly thing, and I want it to be, it's just, hey, it happened, please don't do it. It is, usually I think it may be an email. I think now pretty much it comes out, you send it electronically. It's documentation that here's where we are. The memo of expectation, it could be because whatever you did was a little bit more serious. And I want you to understand that, look, we expect this at Central Middle. And so, or in Parkway, you need to do this. And that one will tend to have a little bit more of a, if there are continued concerns, and Mike and Kim will see there's a boilerplate set of phrases that go into those next pieces. Then you move into, if it's that level of concern, then it could be a letter of reprimand is, you've done a thing. It was a bad thing. We are formally saying you've done a bad thing. We're naming the bad thing. In fact, we're going to name other bad things that contributed to the bad thing that you've done. And we're letting you know that you are formally reprimanded, that if this occurs or anything like this occurs again, we will do further discipline up to and including a statement of charges and dismissal. So if you want, if you want to think about tickets, so the memo of the letter, the initial letter is sort of like your warning from the cop. Then you've got a 5 mile an hour over the limit. Your letter of reprimand is you're doing 55 and a 25. Then from there, again, it can be that case. Statement of charges would be that idea that, yeah, you've done. We are to the point where we are going to formally we're formally charging you and moving towards dismissal. The one that's not on there, and I guess it tends to be, it doesn't fit in evaluation, but it's always, and you put on job target, and that's true for evaluation. I guess the other one, maybe the phrase we use now, is notice of deficiencies. So that is here are the areas in which you're deficient that you've not fixed. So let's imagine we'll, say that we've done evaluations for Will, and we've identified an area, we've done an improvement plan. It's still not getting any better. It's now March. He's made some progress, but not enough, and we don't feel we can move to termination, but he's on the last step. Then you would do a notice of deficiencies. Here's the areas in which you're deficient. Notice of deficiency is different than a PIP because the burden of fixing it is on the teacher. You as an administrator no longer are having to, you've done your part. Every good administrator I know struggles and will still tend to give some support to their teacher because it's what you do, but you're not compelled to. And the notice of deficiency, if they fail that, then it goes to the statement of charges, do not pass go, do not collect $200, go directly to employment elsewhere.
Yeah, I would agree. The one thing I want to say that I don't know that we've said clearly is make sure that you're clear in your timeframes when you're developing a PIP. So we're going to focus on, and I've got actually kind of 2 points, but so it'll ask you for a date. So say it's by 6 weeks. And again, the hardest part of school, and with virtual this year being an option or a possibility, that'll make it even trickier, I think. But okay, if I'm giving you 6 weeks to do this, then what I generally would do before they left the room, I would say, okay, we are meeting, today is a Wednesday during your plan time. Is this a good time for you? You certainly don't want to meet with them weekly on a time that happens to be their team time. Like if you're saying that they're not planned enough, you don't want to take them away from their team that is planning. Like you want to make sure you're not accidentally pulling them from success. But I then schedule all of those meetings on my calendar and have them schedule it right there at the table so that it doesn't accidentally slip away. And I would not split more than 2 weeks in between the conversations, just because you want to make sure you're having that follow-up. And then the other thing I would say about a PIP is, sometimes you walk in, you're like, oh my gosh, how did this happen? And it seems like this is wrong and this is wrong. And it's just kind of a whirlwind of, it could be overwhelming. So I always encourage people to stop and think, like, what's the root cause? So if we have realistically 2 or 3 issues, what's the first thing that we need to fix? Because that's going to be the goal of your PIP. You can't say, gosh, your learning environment's a mess, your planning is off, and you're not at all meeting the instructional needs of students. You really want to focus on that. What is the hinge point? I'm going to start there. But I'm honest about that with people, like from the beginning. So realistically, we need to work on the following 3 things. We're going to start by working on such and such within this 6-week time frame. Clearly you're not just ignoring the other pieces, you're providing support for them, but the documentation is coming around the one at that time. I think, Pat, would you agree with that? Is that fair to say when writing a PIP?
Absolutely. I think that, and you described it perfectly. You may be looking at a ton of pieces that you have concern about. Just like we do with students. Here's all the concerns I have. I'm going to focus on what's the key part that we can address. That the other parts, if we're looking at, we'll say, questions about are the issues with the way that the teacher does. Okay, so no wonder the kids are behaving this way, because the lesson is so unengaging. Nobody, unless you paid them, would be paying attention. And so then you address it that way. And it's that definable piece. And I think Kim said it really well. It's, you may be looking at that. You don't want to let it get too far out, both for your purposes, but also for the teacher. If they've done well, then okay, great, we're good. If they've not, then what are the next pieces that we can do? Because again, you want to have an effective educator for those kids.
Mm-hmm.
So any questions that are kind of hanging out there before we jump into peers?
Sorry. Yes, Kathy, you're right. We are never going to tell you have too much documentation. For non-tenured teachers, would we have a summative conversation? Was that already answered, Will? Yours? For non-tenured teachers, will we have a summative conversation in February and then an end of the year conversation in May?
Yeah, I was just trying to get the specific details. Or would it be like, if I have a conversation with a non-tenured teacher in February, would that also be our end of the year conversation, or would I look to have an end of the year conversation later, or does it depend?
Ideally you'd have it separate, but realistically, a lot of times you're going to have to make the most of your time.
So I'm guessing if they're a good kind of rule of thumb is a first year teacher and they're already effective, we may not need to meet again in May, but if they have a couple of areas that are developing, we probably definitely would want to meet kind of in May. Is that a good way to think about it?
Yeah, I think so. If you can meet with them both, yes, but especially this year, who knows, how many days we're going to have in and out and everything.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. I am going to ask, I have tried about 14 times to log into Peers. I'm using my husband's computer, and he also is an educator in Parkway, and so it's not letting me into the administrator side. It's keeping me on the teacher side, which is awesome. So I'm going to ask if Kathy or Kiera or Tracy or Kim, I don't know if you're still in August. I don't know if you're still listed as a principal in Peers, but if one of you would mind taking over and screen sharing and just kind of walking through, logging in, where the evaluation is, the report, especially the one across the top that shows you where, like your tracker. Any volunteers? I'll send you Starbucks.
So you don't need to send me Starbucks. I'll do it, but you have to walk me through it because I've not done it on Zoom. I've only done it on Google. So do I have to open? I have a second tab opened.
Yeah.
Do I just push share screen? Is it going to be self-explanatory?
It should. Do you have share screen on the bottom or on the top?
Yeah.
Can you click on it?
I think I got it. I think it's not as hard as I thought it was going to be.
I beat you.
You did such a great job.
Oh, it says I'm sharing though. Do you see Kathy's or mine?
Oh, I don't know. Oh, it says send from
I see Tracy's. Yep, you got it, Tracy.
Tracy's? Oh, Tracy got it. Okay.
She's trying to sneak in quiet there.
I know.
Mine look like it. I love you, Tracy.
Okay, so you want us to show them like our favorite tabs and things like that?
Absolutely. Just kind of walk through, like, I'm going to do an evaluation. This is where I go. Okay.
So I'm going to do an evaluation. This is where I go. So this evaluation tab is super helpful. It's where you're going to do most of your like in the moment things. You're also going to view like self-assessments and things like that, and I'll sign off on learning plans, PLPs, all of that. So you would just go in and add a mini observation, and then you're going to collect or just connect on your teacher, click on your teacher. I'm having problems speaking apparently. Let's see, who can I pick on? Someone fantastic. Let's pick on Miss Stacy because she's awesome. So she teaches 4th grade. So I'm just going to enter all these things. I would enter the time and all that. So then the tricky thing that is not that tricky, but it was tricky for me, is you have to click the domains. I think Kiara was talking about this, just making, she likes to have all of her domains open. I don't typically do that. I look for specific domains at specific times, but I think that's just your preference. So say you're going in at the beginning of the year and looking at learning environment, then it's all going to self-populate down here. So you are going to just click and say, like, you know, you're going to have established like what these things look like. I think it's really helpful if you've gone through it and collaborated with your admin team. So you kind of have look-fors. That helps me. So say you see some really good citizenship and like she's just like rocking it on the relationships, like has great, you know, inside things with kids and all that good stuff. And then you can make some notes. Like they referenced, you always need to make notes if it's developing or exemplary, and like write a couple of sentences. And so then to close it out, you would just do the electronic signature and then save.
One thing to note, if you'll scroll back down, Tracy. So one of the cool things that Peers does do, that when we looked at replacing Peers, we couldn't find a program that did this and was a major hang up, is that once you click on those, do you mind scrolling up just a little bit so they can see those highlighted sections?
Yeah.
So once you open this back up the next time to do your next mini, those are going to stay highlighted. Mm-hmm. So you're not starting blank every time, you're basically filling in the puzzle every time. And then all of those scores push forward automatically to the summative, so that you'll, at the end of the year, you'll have everything on that document. So in a growth model, which I hope eventually we get to move to, you're looking for growth in maybe 3 areas across the year. In a performance model, we're looking at where do you perform at least once across the year. And so that's that difference between 3 descriptors multiple times versus all 36. It's just a philosophy that we've kind of outgrown, but our document still hasn't quite caught up with it. So it's just one of those things that, yes, you're going to be looking at classroom management every time, but you can't spend the whole year just looking at classroom management because there's over 30 other things you got to see too.
Mm-hmm. Mhm.
Amy, can I ask one clarifying question and offer one tip for our new
Absolutely.
folks? Did you say that when you see it, I know that the summative document builds with things previously marked, but I don't recall unless something has changed. Things from old minis won't be highlighted if it's a mini observation.
You're right. I misspoke.
I feel like it's empty every time, correct?
Yeah, I misspoke. You're right.
Okay.
But you can
You can
at
go
any
to a
time
report.
click on the summative though, and you can
And
see it.
see it.
So, and oftentimes I'll do that, especially as we're a little further in, just because I want to kind of make sure I get my last little areas.
Right. But you know what you're looking
yes,
for.
it doesn't show on minis, which does stink.
Yeah, sorry about that,
So
Kara. You're right.
spectacular.
It does on the extended though, correct? If I'm remembering, so that you know where to focus. It's not on
I don't think
extended
so.
either.
No, I always have to toggle back and forth. I go to the summative first and see what I might be missing and really hone in on, and then make sure I note that in the summative that I'm looking for, or the extended that I'm looking for it.
Okay.
And then the other tip I wanted to offer is I always try to pull keywords from the criteria descriptor in my notes down below.
Yeah.
When I'm giving, because that keeps me accountable to even just making sure that the feedback I'm providing educators is specific and observable, you know, that I just sort of key, like, and good. Tracy showed you how you can use copy and paste and build around it.
Yeah.
Great
Well, just
suggestion.
great evidence for it. I think that's a good, I do that too. I think that's good. I also use this upload piece, which is pretty cool. So if you have things that you are specific or you want to give evidence by, I don't use it all the time, but sometimes it's valuable. So if you don't save it, it's lost forever. So save it.
Forever.
Forever, ever.
It does not save automatically. If you're looking at a screen and you walk away from that screen, it will log you out and everything you've done will be gone.
Yes.
So the other piece with this is how you toggle back and forth too, because you'll be as administrators evaluating like your counselors, and theirs is different, and your instructional coaches and your librarians, and there's a little variance in that, and that this is where you toggle back and forth between that. And so spending some time to learn the differences or like decide what that looks like within different things, I think is helpful.
Well, and I would also encourage you to keep in mind the tool is wordy. There's a lot of jargon in the tool. Therefore, you do not need to be wordy when observing. But like what I'll do oftentimes is just script little snippets when I'm putting something in there. I just like, I don't think you need to repeat what you've already checked off in a box, if that makes sense. And Amy, I don't know if you would agree with that. I mean, that's how we were initially trained on the tool, but don't feel like you need to, you know, type in a book in each area, because that was not the purpose of the tool when it was built. And I can promise you with, you know, in some cases 6 mini and observations on a person, it'll make you crazy. And the comments do not roll. They're there, you can go back and access them, but the comments are not automatically rolling into a summative. So keep that in mind.
There's a lot of toggling needed in peers.
Yes, great.
That's true. Before we go on to the next one, so you can go back to previous years' evaluations, which can be helpful. Let's see, the extendeds are just down here. You can add.
Just adding to that, what Tracy said, I highly recommend going back and seeing some previous administrators' evaluations, particularly if you are a head principal that is coming in. Find out, was your predecessor really easy on scoring, really challenging on scoring? Did they focus in a particular area? Just kind of gather what did my predecessor do, because you don't have to do the same, but it sure helps you a lot if you're prepared to have that conversation of, well, I scored for the last 18 years exemplary in technology. How are you giving me a needs of? Just having a little bit of context can certainly push off a whole lot of emotional conversations.
I think that's true. Extended. So, okay. So one thing that I use a lot is under reports. So it's this evaluation tracking report. And I go and this is how I keep myself. It's a some spreadsheet, but it does keep me on track for like who needs what, so that you know that this person has done this. It's all color coordinated. So if they haven't signed off on something and you hover on it, like over here, don't look at the names. But if you hover, like it will tell you, oh, it's missing an administrative signature. So, but it tells you everything that you need to do, from the scheduled observations, unscheduled, the summatives, and whether or not you've done them. So I find that very helpful.
I do too. And even though it wasn't fancy and I wasn't going to share because it's not electronic, I'm so visual, it helps me. This is the check sheet I use to pace myself. I print a copy because you can put it on a PDF. When I'm with a teammate, a co-administrator, it helps us watch. Okay, these are my people, these are your people. So we can switch off, now do the other mini. So
this is definitely the most popular report that we have on the evaluation side. On the left, the very top people, can be confusing sometimes. Those are your operations people, like your secretaries or the people that have a different evaluation. So those are right at the top. Since they don't have an evaluation year, that's why they're there. Like Debbie is Tracy's assistant principal, and her evaluation lives somewhere different. So on the left, you'll see the evaluation year. In the middle, you'll see the guidelines for the number of evaluations required to do. Everything that's gray can be done, but you don't have to do it. So you can see like Emily, it was required 3 to 5 and she did 4. So it's just important that you don't feel like you have to fill in X's all the way across. It will automatically populate your minimum, but you do need to get the minimum done. You can also
and that's more or less the sheet that I made for myself in Excel. And so I would make it at the beginning of each year, and then I would separate out the tabs for each one of us as evaluators, give them one. But I always have like a sheet protector on top of my computer that I would shove everything in, that I would kindly refer to as my Bible, because it would have like my F&P scores, my problem solving process. My evaluation form was always on top. That way, as I evaluated somebody and hit send, I just would pencil in the date and it let me know exactly. I mean, I knew at a glance where I was at all times, and oh my goodness, well, that person was out on maternity leave. I really need to get in there and get this focused on in the next couple of weeks. And that was just how I managed it. Now, I did not pop back and forth between people. So if I evaluated them, I evaluated them. If my AP did, my AP did. So that made it easier to track for me. I mean, like I said, everybody's got to find their own jam. But I think it just made it simple. And I will say, if you have somebody you're going to be working through a PIP process, it's probably in your best interest to have one person evaluating them so that the expectations are clear and consistent. They might perhaps ask to have another evaluator pop in, which you can certainly do, but I would still keep them on my caseload, or on one person's caseload technically.
Great suggestion.
And I'm sorry to interject here, and we may not be able to answer this right now, Kim, for teachers that we share that are part-time in the different buildings, who actually tells us the designation of where we should be in peers and how we share that? And you can table this if you want to, but that's a question I have.
Typically, it's where they start Monday morning, that's the head evaluator, and then they work together to score. We did have a situation once where we had a traveling teacher that had really great scores at one building and was really struggling at another building. And so because it is shared in the same, that can get a little bit hairy, but they worked it out by talking to each other and then having a conference. But Rodney will put both principals on as the evaluator. Is that what you were asking? Okay.
Miss Amy, is there anything else you'd like me to go to?
Will you just go back to reports?
Yep.
Thank you. This is definitely, Definitely worth just kind of scrolling through and finding stuff. You can click on this and see historically how your building was evaluated. So you can see like what percentage of people were in the last couple of years and how just at a big glance, you know, at a top level glance, how they were scored, which again can be helpful just to give you some context. And then if you'll go back again, the next one, this is where you can see those notes. Is this where you can access the notes from previous years?
I thought so.
I
Are they
think
confidential?
that's
Should I click on it?
So I would just take some time and just go through this evaluation part. There's a lot of different chunks on it, but lots of things that you will want are already there. So just taking the time to kind of familiarize yourself or spending some time with your co-administrator and just learning kind of how peers looks and works is not going to do you wrong. Any other suggestions or anything actually within peers? All right. Thank you so much, Tracy, for driving. I appreciate that. So I would really like to say that this is weird to do this evaluation very much sitting by myself in this room. So thank you for being gracious. It's hard not seeing your faces and wondering what you're thinking, but it's the world that we're in right now, right? So typically at this time, we would start watching some videos and score some, calibrate and score some things together. I really think that at this time, it doesn't make sense because there's so many unanswered questions that are going to be coming out next week, it sounds like, about how the evaluation process is doing this year. So I know that historically we've done some of that during the new educator induction, and I think it's just going to make more sense to do that after we have questions answered, particularly in some of the areas like, well, what does this look like if we only see the kids once a week or twice a week, or how do we score this if we're only meeting virtually? So I just don't want us to waste time, and I know that you guys are all probably still panicking about the number of emails that are growing in your inbox as you're sitting here with me. I do want to ask though, if Kim, Mike, and Pat have any final words of wisdom, and if our other experienced administrators or experienced Parkway teachers have any things that, tips that they would like to share before we say goodbye.
I had one really easy tip that I know that a lot of you are agenda builders. So the review of this evaluation tool, we have always included it as part of the building day of new teacher orientation. If you don't already have that kind of on your agenda, because I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, someone jump in, that part of the agreement is for an administrator to review that with your new teachers. So
and we do the high school coaches overview kind of the process at NEO, but then yeah, if you would do that at your building, and I send out a sample agenda of that as well.
Good, okay, just to have it perfect. And then you can kind of defer to a coach or whoever their go-to person is to support them in the technology side of the system in the process.
I guess the thing I would say, and Amy touched on it, this is going to be the most bizarre year any of us have, I hope, any of us have ever experienced. If you've experienced a year different than, more bizarre than this one, I need to sit down and talk with you. So it'll be true for you as administrators, it'll be true for our teachers, our kids, for everybody. So however we go forward, I guess my message would be, that your teachers know that in this process that you're doing your level best to support them being good. If that's what they know, even those harsh things that you may have to say, for the most part will be well heard. And I think the other piece I would say, and almost all of your buildings, you typically have pretty good, in most buildings we have 1 or 2 building reps. They are great go-to people also for especially if you're new to your building. What's the temperature? What's the flavor? How have we done things in the past? What are things that are traditional concerns? When you're sitting down and you're doing a improvement plan, and this may be different from different places, teachers have the ability to say, I'd like to have someone with me. And oftentimes they don't want anybody there to argue about. It's like, I'm freaked out. This is going on. I need somebody else who can be writing things down and listening as we're going forward. So, and
I also have
again,
over the years,
this is an important.
Over the years, collected sort of a bank of PIPs. So if you get to a point where you want to see, like, okay, I'm really worried about relationships with kids, we might have an example of what a PIP and how it was written and sort of the timeline available for you. So if you get to that point, please don't hesitate. I'm unfortunately have helped write PIPs and helped document them, but I know that particularly your first year doing it and wanting to make sure all your T's are crossed and I's are dotted and all of that is done right, sometimes seeing an example can be helpful. Mike or Kim, anything else? Did we lose Kim? All right, I think then, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. And yes, absolutely.
There's some questions in the chat.
Yes, Amy, I was waving at you and I realized you probably couldn't see me. I have some questions and I'll just read them. I don't know if there's any other ones. So first, I was having some issues logging in. Can you remind me, for peers, is it just the same as our Parkway domain or whatever, however we log in?
Yep, it's just your name, no @parkwayschools.net, just your name and then your network password.
Okay. And the question I wanted to see is, could we get a little bit of insights as to what our evaluation process will look like as administrators in Parkway?
Yes, so on that same website that on my website that has the rubrics for the teachers, at the very bottom, there is a rubric for building administrators that you can access there. There's also a, I think it's called like overview by years for administrators that you'll see. Chelsea is your evaluator, and she, I'm not sure if she does it in peers or outside of peers, but she will go over kind of how she works the process. But it's a very similar one. You, instead of having a PLP, you have an area of focus. And so you'll set a goal at the beginning of the year. You know, it's basically your SIP, your school improvement plan, and what area you're going to focus on in growth. You do the same process of self-evaluation. She'll do some observations. They're called interactions. It's not as formal as filling out the rubric usually. And then there's the end of the year conversation where she'll give you your completed evaluation. Kira, let's see, do we have any principals that were head principals? So Chelsea's probably not evaluated Tracy or Kira before, have they?
No, but I believe that training is in the, I don't know what it'll look like this year, but it's traditionally been in that new admin, the release days that they talked about, where we would have a sub come in if both of us had to be there.
Yes.
So,
and yeah, again, sorry, I'm not trying to punt it. It's just kind of Chelsea's boat. Other questions that I can, now for assistant principals, you obviously are evaluated by your principal. And same thing, it's just, you can work out how you want that to look together. They'll let you know, when they're doing an interaction, which is an observation. And a lot of times it'll be more informal because you guys spend so many hours together. Other questions? All right. Enjoy the rest of your day. Only 2 hours and 17 minutes until 5 o'clock. Bye.
Bye, everybody. Hi, Will.